Here's a Beyond the Pitch podcast quick hit from the WVSA Digital Network.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's so much new research that's coming out and looking at, at what point in the cycle should athletes eat this? Should they be trying to optimize certain things at certain points? And the answer is yes, but also no, right? Because you can see Olympic athletes or any athlete winning and crushing competitions at any point during their cycle, right? So it's partially about your training, your overall nutrition. But yeah, absolutely. You can fine tune some things within your menstrual cycle. So think about your cycle in three phases. So you have the follicular phase, you've got ovulation, and then you've got that luteal phase, which is that final phase right before you start your menstrual cycle again. So the follicular phase, that first phase, is broken down into two parts. So first is menstruation, so day one, when you get your period, and then it goes into say day 7 to 11, because everyone's cycle is a little bit different, where things start to change a little bit. Your hormones start to pick up again. So in that first phase of menstruation, like I mentioned earlier, you really want to focus on iron. You're losing a lot of iron. You want to make sure your body is still maintaining a good iron balance. And, if you look at the general recommendation for iron, the recommendation for men is 8 micrograms per day, right? Or, milligrams per day, where females want 18. It's quite a bit more. You're looking at 10 milligrams more per day. Why? Because we lose a lot in our menstrual cycle. So we want to make sure that we're keeping up on that. So you're looking at things like beef, beans, lentils, tofu, eggs, things that give you a good variety of iron. You can look at supplements, but I always say before we jump to supplements at any time, you want to make sure that you are, one, getting blood work done, working with a dietitian, talking with your doctor, because anytime you introduce a supplement, it can throw off your system a little bit. And when you introduce a high dose of iron, it can also cause some constipation. So we want to make sure we're working through that as well. Then with iron, vitamin C, so strawberries, bell peppers, mangoes, tomatoes. And then we have vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is important because it's good for growth, development, blood function. So your blood cells also support your nervous system. So vitamin B12 comes from things like salmon, beef, eggs, and a great plant-based source for those vegan and vegetarians out there is nutritional yeast. And so with all that, you still want to focus on increased energy and really maintaining that energy throughout your menstrual cycle, because you might feel it's not the best feeling in that time of the month. So focusing on consistent carbohydrate intake. And so what I mean by that is you want to give your body the best energy sources you can. So you're looking at complex, high fiber carbs. So maybe starting off with a breakfast of oatmeal or a whole grain cereal or whole grain bagel. For lunch, you're having lots of maybe brown rice, quinoa, pastas, things that have high fiber, but still are fantastic sources of carbohydrates to keep your energy up during that part of your cycle. And then once you hit, towards the end of your menstrual cycle, you're in that late follicular phase. And that's where you still want to focus on lots of fiber to keep things moving, especially if you're focusing on iron. Fiber will help with constipation. You want to focus on hydration. So the typical recommendation that I say is, first, take your body weight and divide it by 2. That's the minimum number of ounces you want to focus on per day. And then you taper up from there, depending on your training, your sweat rate, the humidity, the environment. But that's really when you want to start when it comes to hydration and that first kind of chunk of your menstrual cycle. And then you get into ovulation. This is just, a day to 3 days in the middle of your cycle. Typically, it's anywhere from day 12 to 14. Again, this varies depending on you and how long your cycle is. But this is when your hormones, they reach your peak, right? And so you're going to have you may notice a little bit more energy. I had some female athletes who say wow, I had energy the past couple of days just out of nowhere. I'm like, well, let's look at your cycle. Where are you in your cycle? And that's why it's important to know maybe this is if it happens to fall and you had a really great practice, it's probably because you might be in a certain part of your cycle. So in this ovulation phase, again, we're focusing on high fiber foods, maintaining that consistent energy intake from carbohydrates. And we're also going to tie in some magnesium from seeds, nuts. This one's one of my top favorites, dark chocolate. Really, really good source of magnesium. And then finally, we have that last phase, right? So right before your menstrual cycle, right before your uterus sheds its lining. It's called that luteal phase. And you see a decline in hormones. And so with a decline in hormones, we want to make sure that we're supporting our bone health. So we're going to look at some calcium, some vitamin D, magnesium, and of course omega-3s to help with inflammation as well.